I really don't think people understand how closely related Marcus Smart and Tony Allen's career arcs are. Sure, now that Smart has been traded from the Boston Celtics to the Memphis Grizzlies, people are starting to put the pieces together, but still, I think it needs to be talked about. After all, both players played college hoops at Oklahoma State before becoming first-round picks by the Celtics. After several years of solid production, they found themselves traded to the Grizzlies. Yes, Smart came to the Grizzlies 3 years later in his career, but he's only 1 year older than Allen was when he went to Memphis. Either way, the two hard-nosed, high-energy guards came to Memphis at exactly the right time to install a culture of toughness and effort into the club. However, the similarities don't end there. Let's go back to college, where both players spent 2 years in the Cowboy system. Obviously, Allen had a much better coach in Eddie Sutton, but Smart was unquestionably the better player. Either way, both players were dominant for the Cowboys, though Allen actually improved over his first 2 seasons, while Smart very slightly regressed after a stellar freshman season. Part of that comes down to the idea at the time in scouting circles that he couldn't shoot, which he came back to try and prove wrong to little success. In fact, it's somewhat surprising to note that Allen's effective field goal percentage is actually 4% better than Smart's, beating him in every classic shooting percentage except for free throw percentage. As 6'4" guards, both players also excelled at rebounding, though Smart's assist numbers are higher because he was the primary ball handler, while Allen worked in a duo with John Lucas III. What's most interesting, though, is how similar the two players are in usage, rate, and defensive win shares. Now, one problem here is that we don't have Allen's full advanced stats from the 2003-04 season, which is his best season, but we can see how exceptional his defense was even then as Oklahoma State's top scorer. Smart isn't quite as good that second season, again, because of his goal to improve his draft stock by shooting. I would say too much, but if you look at his freshman year, you can see how close these two were in terms of contributing on the defensive end, even as the star scorer on their college team. When we get to their NBA careers, the parallels are even more overwhelming. Consider that over their first 3 years, both players grew into double-digit scorers who posted better defensive win shares than offensive win shares. Now, Smart is actually significantly better in the latter stat at that stage of his career, but part of that could be attributed to Smart's young team being a little more defensively stout than Allen's. Yes, both teams averaged about the same points per game given up, but remember that the NBA average points per game was much lower in 2005 than it was in 2015. Of course, here's where we also have to talk about Allen's season-ending injury during his third season. That knee injury killed his 2006-2007 season, which was shaping up to be his statistical best at the time. It also left him with a mangled knee, which meant that he would never retain his ability to slash to the basket at the same level when he came back. Plus, the next season, the Celtics added Ray Allen, forcing the Grindfather to the bench, but letting him win a title. Interestingly, Smart also suffered a season-ending injury to his hand during his fourth season. Fortunately for him, it wasn't something that would take away his ability to get to the basket, and he's actually remained a double-digit scorer on average since then. However, it is important to note that in his absence, Jaylen Brown started his ascension. Alongside superstars Kyrie Irving and second-year star Jason Tatum, Smart's offensive role, much like Tony Allen's, was greatly diminished even if he hadn't lost that step. From there, both players had to take a step back and focus on what makes them the great players they are: defense. Look at Allen's advanced defensive stats after getting back into form in 2008-09. His steal percentage didn't drop below 3 until his last year in the NBA. His block percentage stays above 1.5 until 2013-14. His defensive win shares do dip a bit at first, but his DWS stays above 2, usually much higher every year from 2010-11 until he leaves Memphis outside of having a 1.9 in 15-16. Similarly, in his comeback year, Smart posted a defensive win share of 3.1 and kept it above 2.7 every year except for 2020-21, which was, of course, shortened due to COVID. His DWS peaked in 2021-22 at 3.7, which was also the year his overall win share hit its high at 5.6. What's most interesting if you're a Grizz fan is looking at the two players' value over replacement player, or VORP. This stat basically estimates how much more valuable a player has been over a base level replacement player. If you look at Allen's VORP, it jumped massively when he joined the Grizz because he was allowed to come in and simply play lockdown defense. Now, Smart has posted better VORP ratings in his early career than Allen did to this point, but the potential for him to get the bump is also there, especially especially if he's able to play along Ja Morant for most of the season. Remember, one of the reasons Allen became such a tenacious defender was that even though he had lost that step, he was also playing alongside guys like Mike Conley, Zach Randolph, and Marc Gasol, who allowed him to focus more on defense. We can't say for sure, but Smart could be in line for a similar jump. And if that happens, we might see some of his advanced stats go up because he won't be asked to do as much on the offensive side of the ball. Plus, he now has Jaren Jackson Jr. in his back, which might make him an even more elite defender. In that way, it almost makes you wish that the Tony Allen we saw later in his life was able to play with KG instead of having to play with lesser defenders. No, I haven't forgotten that Mark won the Defensive Player of the Year in 2013, but Kevin Garnett is an all-time defender throughout his entire career, and Mark just isn't really on that level. Of course, it is worth noting that Smart is coming from a team where he already had a relatively low usage rate, meaning he was already playing off the ball pretty often. Even still, he'll at worst enjoy similar usage numbers now that he's playing with Ja Morant and Desmond Bane instead of Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. On top of that, the Grizz are getting a no-nonsense vet that should help keep guys like Ja Morant in line. Remember how Tony Allen put the young OJ Mayo in his place after he failed to pay off his debts to the veteran player? I'm not saying Marcus Smart is literally going to knock some sense into Ja, but at the very least, Steven Adams now has some backup to get the younger members of the team in line. If those two can't get everyone walking the straight and narrow, especially now that Dillon Brooks is gone, then there might not be anybody who can. It's pretty clear that Smart is well suited to bringing back the grit and grind mindset that Tony Allen first instilled. While the two players traditionally play different positions, they're actually so similar that it's kind of wild. If you're a Grizzlies fan like me, the best case scenario is that he uses this reduced offensive role to become an even better defender, if that's even possible for the 2021-22 Defensive Player of the Year. The only real thing that could stop him is if he doesn't get enough playing time when Ja comes back, as he's probably not stealing minutes from Morant and Bane. Either way, it's hard to imagine a player that's more perfect to take over the mantle of the Grindfather. Us Grizzlies fans just have to hope that if Allen is Vito Corleone and Smart is Michael, that Ja Morant doesn't turn out to be that assassin Mosca, and they can coexist as a dominant force that takes the NBA by storm.